Spinoza demonstrated exactly why you can believe in God, without the Church revealing a reality that organized Christianity never wanted to admit. There are truths so dangerous that speaking them can cost you everything: your family, your community, your good name, and even your life. And the most dangerous truth of all is not denying God, but daring to affirm that you can find Him without intermediaries, without temples made of stone, and without men who charge a toll for access to the divine. Baruch Spinoza discovered this truth and paid the highest price a human being can pay. But the legacy he left behind would forever change our understanding of spirituality, freedom, and the intimate connection between the human soul and the sacred. What you are about to hear is not just another story of ancient philosophy. It is a map toward your own spiritual liberation. It is the rational demonstration of something you perhaps already feel deep in your gut, but never dared to admit out loud: that you do not need religious buildings to be spiritual, that you do not need elaborate rituals to connect with the divine, and that you do not need the approval of any institution to walk your own sacred path. Our story begins in Amsterdam in the year 1632. In the heart of the Portuguese Jewish quarter, a child is born who will bear a beautiful name, Baruch, which means blessed. His parents had fled the terrifying reach of the Spanish Inquisition, leaving behind everything they knew to find a place where they could practice their faith freely, where they didn't have to hide who they were, and where terror was not the price of devotion. The Jewish community of Amsterdam was more than just a religion. It was a refuge, a fortress against a hostile world. It was a complete system of life, where every aspect of existence was tightly interwoven with tradition, with law, and with absolute obedience to the elders who interpreted the divine will. From a very young age, Baruch showed an extraordinary intellect. The rabbis looked at him with pride, but that pride was mixed with something else, something unsettling. He was too brilliant. He asked too many questions. He questioned with a depth that brought discomfort to those who preferred simple answers and obedience without nuance. While other children memorized the scriptures without blinking, Baruch wanted to understand the why behind every commandment and the profound meaning behind every ritual. And there was a specific question germinating in his mind, like a rebellious seed. If God is infinite, perfect, and omnipresent, why would He need specific buildings to be worshipped? Why would He require precise rituals executed in exactly a certain way? Why would His love be conditioned on us following rules created by men thousands of years ago in completely different contexts? The community in which he grew up was hermetic protective to the point of suffocation. Every Saturday during Shabbat, every festivity with its exact ceremonies, every meal with its specific blessings, every single aspect of life was regulated by laws that stretched back to biblical times. The rabbis were the guardians of this order, respected men who wore dark robes and spoke with the unshakable authority of those who interpret the direct will of God. To question them was not merely to disagree with a human opinion. It was to challenge the Creator Himself. But young Spinoza could not close his eyes to certain contradictions that became increasingly glaring as he grew older. The same men who preached humility and detachment lived in the largest houses in the quarter. Those who taught that all Jews were equal before God maintained rigid hierarchies of power and privilege. Those who spoke of God's infinite love constantly used fear as their primary tool of control. Obey or God will punish you. Question and curses will fall upon your head. Follow the rules or be expelled not only from the community, but from the divine presence itself. Perhaps you too know that sensation. Those days when you went to church or the temple and there was something comforting in the certainty in knowing exactly what to believe and having answers for every existential question. The community held you defined. You gave you a place in the cosmos. But there was also that small inner voice, that discomfort that grew. every time you saw the gap between the sermon and the preacher's life? That hollowness, that no ritual could fully fill those questions you weren't supposed to ask, but that wouldn't stop whispering in your mind during sleepless nights. Spinoza felt that voice too, and he committed the error or the bravery of listening to it. He was 21 years old when he read something that would change his life forever. His Latin teacher, an ex-Jesuit named Franciscus van den Enden, lent him a forbidden book, Discourse on the Method by René Descartes. Reading non-Jewish philosophy was strictly prohibited, but Spinoza's curiosity was stronger than his fear. He opened the book by the light of a candle in his room, and on the first few pages he found something revolutionary. I think, therefore I am. Descartes' proposed that it was possible more than that necessary to doubt everything, even religious teachings, to arrive at the truth. Spinoza felt as if someone had thrown open a window in a room that had been sealed shut for decades. Fresh air rushed in, but with that air came the vertigo of the unknown. The questions began to multiply in his mind like stars in the night sky. If God gave us reason, intellect, and the capacity to think critically, why would it be a sin to use them? If God is perfect and infinite, can he really feel anger, jealousy, or the need for vengeance, as the scriptures describe? Wouldn't those emotions be too human, too small, for a being that is truly infinite? If God is everywhere, as taught is, he not also in nature, in every tree, in every river, in every animal? Why then can we only find him in specific buildings constructed by human hands? For months, Spinoza attempted to wrestle his doubts into submission, trying to reconcile the expanding universe in his mind with the rigid faith of his fathers. He woke up earlier to pray with greater intensity, studying the Torah in search of answers that would satisfy both his heart and his intellect. He fasted more than was necessary, as if physical hunger could somehow silence the intellectual hunger that consumed him. Finally, driven by a desperate need for clarity, he gathered the courage to approach one of the leading figures of the community, his former teacher, Rabbi Saul Levi Mortira. With respect but absolute honesty, he shared some of his safer concerns, holding back the most dangerous thoughts that burned within him. The rabbi's response was immediate and blunt, landing like a slamming door. "These questions do not come from you," Mortera declared, "but from the evil angel whispering in your ear. They are temptations from the enemy to lead you off the righteous path." The prescription was simple: pray more, study less Gentile philosophy, and obey. The mysteries of God are not meant to be understood by limited human reason, the rabbi insisted. Our task is not to understand, but to obey. Spinoza left that conversation feeling more alone than ever before. He realized with terrifying clarity that the rabbi's answers were not answers at all. They were walls built to stop exploration, the sound of fear disguised as authority. The religious structure didn't want him to understand God. It wanted him to submit to the men who claimed to represent God. He tried to speak with his father Miguel, a respected merchant, who warned him, with grave concern, "There are questions better left unasked if you value your future. Think of the family, think of the business." But the doubts could not be silenced with pragmatism. They were like a ball held under water, requiring more and more energy to suppress, until they inevitably burst to the surface. One afternoon, Spinoza witnessed a scene that crystallized all his doubts into a single perfect image of betrayal. He was walking near the synagogue when he saw Rabbi Mortera leaving a council meeting. The rabbi was dressed in robes of the finest fabric, his rings glistening under the afternoon sun as he climbed into a private carriage that waited for him. At that exact moment, a poor Jewish family passed by a tailor Spinoza knew carrying broken tools, his wife guiding two small children with mended clothes and faces that clearly didn't know the feeling of a full stomach. Spinoza knew this family had paid the mandatory tithe to the synagogue that week. The tailor had complained about it in hushed tones. That payment had left them without money to repair the very tools they needed to survive. Yet the rabbi didn't even glance at them as his carriage rolled away. That very morning, this same man had preached about humility, citing prophets who condemned the rich for oppressing the poor. Spinoza realized with painful clarity that the system no longer existed to bring people closer to God. It existed to maintain the power and wealth of those who controlled it. Religion had become a sophisticated business, and God was the product they were selling. It was then that Spinoza's mind turned to the historical Jesus, not the icon of the church, but the Jewish revolutionary he had read about in forbidden texts. He thought of the man who overturned the tables of the merchants in the temple, who called the religious leaders whitewashed tombs. Jesus, who never asked for temples to be built in his name, but spoke of the kingdom of God as something internal. The Christian churches dominating Europe were even more opulent than the synagogue, their cathedrals dripping in gold, while preaching about a man who had nowhere to lay his head. Both systems had committed the same fundamental error. They had turned the direct encounter with the divine into a monopoly mediated by men who charged a spiritual toll. July of 1656 brought a heat that did nothing to warm the chill, settling over Spinoza's life. He was 23 years old when the official summons arrived from the Muhammad, the Council of Elders. The accusations leveled against him were not merely disagreements. They were treated as spiritual crimes of the highest order. He was charged with teaching doctrines contrary to the law of Moses, denying the divine authority of the Torah, and frequenting the improper company of heretics. But the gravest charge, the one that made the elders tremble with a mix of rage and fear, was his assertion that God and nature were one and the same. To the council, this was pure blasphemy. Spinoza was suggesting something radical, that God was not a separate entity sitting on a throne in the sky, judging from above, but rather the very substance of the universe itself. That the sacred permeated the profane, that every tree was God, growing, every river was God flowing, and every human being was God becoming conscious of himself. The hearing took place in a stark, austere room within the synagogue complex. The 7 members of the Muhammad sat on a raised platform looking down like ancient judges. Spinoza stood alone. In the shadows of the room stood his family. His sister Rebecca wept silently, her head covered, while his uncles looked on with a heartbreaking mixture of shame and confusion. Rabbi Mortera read the charges, his voice filling the stone chamber. Then he leaned forward, shifting from the tone of a judge to that of a disappointed father. "Baruch," he said, "this community has given you everything. We educated you, we fed you when your father was ill, we protected you from the wolves outside. And you repay this kindness with betrayal." The offer that followed was simple, brutal, and seductive. "Recant," Mortera commanded. "Publicly take back your heresies. Burn your forbidden books. Promise never to teach these dangerous ideas again, and you may stay. Your family will be spared the shame. Your future will be secure. You will have the forgiveness of God and of this community." The silence that followed weighed tons. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the prodigal son to break, to apologize, to return to the fold. Spinoza closed his eyes for a moment. In the darkness of his mind, memories of his childhood flashed by the Sabbath candles, his father's pride, the warm, suffocating embrace of the only world he had ever known. But when he opened his eyes, his voice shook not with fear, but with the terrifying resolve of a man who can no longer lie. "I cannot recant what I know in my heart to be true," he said. "I have not blasphemed. On the contrary, I have sought God with more honesty than many who sit here judging me. If seeking the truth is heresy, then I am a heretic. But I prefer to be an honest heretic than a hypocritical believer. I prefer to be alone with a clean conscience than to live a lie in your company. The room erupted in scandalized whispers. Mortera stood up furious. You call us hypocrites. Spinoza did not back down. I call it hypocrisy to preach humility from wealth, to preach love while sowing fear, to say God is infinite but lock him inside bricks and rituals. Jesus said the same in his time, and look what was done to him. You will do to me what you must, but you will not make me betray my soul. He had spoken the forbidden name, comparing his plight to the crucified heretic. It was over. The bridge was burned. On July 27, 1656, the air outside the Portuguese synagogue of Amsterdam was heavy, but inside it was suffocating. The ritual that was about to take place was the herem, the most severe order of excommunication the Jewish community had pronounced in decades. It was not merely a legal proceeding. It was a funeral for a living man. The Ark of the Torah was opened, revealing the sacred scrolls, and black candles were lit, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Flames that would soon be extinguished one by one, to symbolize the extinguishing of Baruch Spinoza's spiritual light. Then came the sound. The rabbi raised the shofar, the ram's horn, used in the most solemn of ceremonies. He blew into it, and a guttural, primitive, ancestral wail tore through the silence of the room. It was a sound that vibrated in the bones, a sonic knife designed to sever the soul from its people. As the echoes of the horn faded, the rabbi began to read the curse from the book of the law. His voice was ceremonial, devoid of pity, channeling the wrath of an ancient God. By the decree of the angels, and by the command of the holy men, he intoned, we excommunicate, expel, curse, and damn Baruch Spinoza. The words that followed were terrifying in their specificity, leaving no corner of his life untouched by hatred. Cursed be he by day, and cursed be he by night. Cursed be he when he lies down, and cursed be he when he rises up. Cursed be he when he goes out, and cursed be he when he comes in. May the Lord never forgive him. May the wrath and fury of the Lord burn against this man, and bring upon him all the curses that are written in the book of the law. The rabbi paused, letting the weight of the damnation settle before delivering the final social death sentence. No one should communicate with him, neither in writing nor verbally. No one is to be under the same roof with him. No one is to come within 4 cubits of him. And no one is to read anything written by his hand. One by one, the candles were inverted and dipped into a vat of blood, sizzling as they went out, plunging the room into a symbolic darkness. The shofar sounded again, final, irreversible absolute. Spinoza stood there motionless, listening to his own erasure. He was being murdered socially, while his heart still beat. His family, present in the shadows, wept openly now. But the tragedy was that they did not move toward him to comfort him. They pulled back. The invisible wall had already been erected. To his mother, to his sister, to his cousins, he was no longer Baruch, the blessed child. He was the cherub, the banned one, the accursed, a contagion that could infect their own souls. That same afternoon, Spinoza lost everything a human being can lose without losing their physical life. He was stripped of his inheritance. His name was scrubbed from the business. When he walked out of the synagogue, he stepped into a world that had suddenly turned cold. Former friends crossed the street to avoid his shadow, as if he were a leper. Merchants who had known him since he was a toddler slammed their shutters. He returned briefly to the house he shared with his sister to collect his few belongings. Rebecca looked at him with eyes red and swollen from crying, her face a mask of betrayal and confusion. "Was it worth it, Baruch?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Was it worth destroying the family for your philosophical ideas?" He had no answer for her then. The pain was too raw to articulate. He simply packed his bag and walked out the door, forcing himself not to look back, knowing that if he turned around, the grief might crush his resolve to keep moving. He walked out of the Jewish quarter, out of the protection of the tribe, and into the unforgiving anonymity of the wider world. The first nights outside the walls of his community were the darkest of his life. Spinoza found a small, drafty room in a Christian neighborhood, far removed from the familiar sounds and smells of the Jewish quarter. It was summer, yet he felt a constant penetrating chill, a cold that no blanket could warm, for it was the freeze of absolute solitude, the sensation of having been severed from the social map of his world. At night he would wake up sweating from nightmares, where the curses were literal, where the ground opened up to swallow him, and he fell into an infinite dark abyss with no hand reaching out to catch him. He would wake with his heart hammering against his ribs, wondering if he had made a catastrophic mistake, if he was just an arrogant fool who had traded the warmth and safety of a loving tribe for abstract ideas that offered no comfort in the dark. During the day, hunger was his constant companion. Without his family's support or his business connections, he had to find a way to survive. He taught himself to grind and polish optical lenses, a humble, grueling trade, but one in high demand in an age obsessed with seeing further. There was a profound, almost cruel irony in his new life. His hands, which had once cradled sacred texts, were now coated in abrasive dust, grinding glass so that others could see the world more clearly. But the physical hardship was nothing compared to the silence. The worst hunger wasn't for bread. It was for the sound of his own name spoken with affection. Humans are not built for absolute isolation. We are social animals who need a tribe to reflect our existence back to us. Spinoza had lost everyone in a single stroke. There were days when he spoke to no one, his voice atrophying in his throat, his only interaction a transactional nod to the baker or his landlady. The silence in his room became deafening. He could hear himself breathe, chew, and swallow, and in those quiet hours, a terrifying question would rise. If a man lives, but no one acknowledges him, is he truly alive? Or is he merely a ghost walking among the living? The temptation to surrender was a constant throbbing wound. It would have been so easy to walk back to the synagogue on a Friday night, to fall to his knees before the Muhammad, to weep real tears because the sorrow was real, and say he was wrong. To say that pride had blinded him, that the devil had confused him, that he was ready to submit. They would have welcomed him back like the prodigal son. He could have regained his family, his heritage, his place in the world. All he had to do was lie. All he had to do was agree to live in hypocrisy for the rest of his days, to die slowly on the inside, while looking successful on the outside. One brutal winter night, the isolation brought him to the edge of a total breakdown. He was hungry, shivering, and though only 23, he felt ancient. He sat on the floor of his empty room. He didn't even own a decent chair, and finally let go. He wept with the abandonment of a lost child. God, he whispered into the crushing darkness. If you exist, if you are truly there somewhere beyond these walls, and these laws, give me a sign. Give me something to tell me that I am not completely mad, that this sacrifice has some meaning, because I do not know how much longer I can bear this silence alone. There was no booming voice from the heavens. No angel descended with wings of fire. No dramatic miracle split the ceiling. The room remained dark and silent. But that silence was the prelude to the dawn. The next morning, driven by a restlessness he could no longer contain, Spinoza walked out of the city gates at dawn. He needed to escape the room that had become his prison. He walked until his boots sank into the damp earth of the open fields surrounding Amsterdam. The sun was just beginning to breach the horizon, slow orange and enormous, burning away the gray mist of the night. And then he saw it. It wasn't a burning bush or a parting sea. It was something far more subtle and infinitely more profound. The morning dew clung to every blade of grass, and as the sunlight hit the field, every single droplet turned into a prism. Thousands, millions of spheres, each one capturing the image of the sun, each one holding the totality of the light in miniature. Spinoza stood frozen in the mud, his breath catching in his throat. His mind, which had been running in frantic circles of doubt for months, suddenly went still. In that instant of perfect clarity, the walls of the universe dissolved. He finally understood what the historical Jesus had tried to say when he proclaimed, "I and the Father are one." It wasn't that Jesus was a unique anomaly, separate from the rest of humanity. It was that we are all expressions of the divine, just as every dewdrop is an expression of the sun. God was not a distant monarch sitting on a cloud checking a ledger of sins. God was the field, the light, the air filling his lungs, and the mud beneath his feet. God was the substance of reality itself. Deus, Sive, Natura, God or nature. They were not two things, but one single infinite reality viewed from different perspectives. If this was true, then everything changed. The excommunication meant nothing, because you cannot be expelled from God any more than a wave can be expelled from the ocean. He didn't need the synagogue, because the entire cosmos was the temple. He didn't need the intricate rituals, because every conscious breath was a prayer. He didn't need the rabbis or the priests to be his bridge to the divine, because there was no gap to cross. The access was direct, immediate, and free. Tears streamed down his face. But this time they were not tears of loneliness. They were tears of relief, of a joy so vast it felt like breaking. He realized he was not alone. It was impossible to be alone when every atom of your body is woven into the divine fabric of the universe. This was the dangerous secret that Jesus had died for. He hadn't been killed just for blasphemy. He was executed because he was bad for business. He had threatened the most lucrative industry in human history, the mediation between man and God. If the kingdom of heaven is truly within you, as Jesus said, then the cathedrals of gold, the tithes, the hierarchies of power, and the men in robes who sell salvation, they all become obsolete. Jesus was dangerous, and Spinoza was dangerous because they both handed the keys of the temple back to the people. They taught that the sacred is not something you buy or earn through obedience. It is what you are. Spinoza turned back toward the city, no longer a banished exile, but a free man in a world made of God. He would spend the rest of his short life grinding lenses and writing books that would shake the world, proving that while they could strip him of his name and his tribe, they could never take away the truth he found in the silence that you are and have always been, standing on holy ground.